In much of the world, Christianity is in decline, a relic much like this church, one of the oldest in Britain. But even as an atheist, I don't want to see the teachings of Jesus of Nazareth go the same way as these ruins. As a lapsed Catholic and a failed Methodist, I grew up steeped in the teachings of Jesus. So when I hear people say blithely, Jesus said this or Jesus taught that, I often know that they're wrong. Jesus is actually a much more surprising and challenging thinker than a lot of people give him credit for. Jesus is often portrayed as a friend of the poor and the weak. Blessed be ye poor. When thou makest a feast, call ye the poor, the lame, the maimed, the blind. At the same time, he notoriously allowed himself to be anointed with very expensive ointments, which, as Judas Iscariot pointed out, could have been sold for more than 300 pence and given to the poor. In his defence, Jesus says, "For ye have the poor with you always." There's no contradiction here. If being poor is no bad thing, as in some ways the sources of many blessings, then alleviating it simply isn't the highest priority. In some ways, the poor are even at an advantage. The rich are burdened by their wealth. You can't pass through the narrow gate if you're laden with worldly goods. Wealth actually distracts us from what really matters. Lay not up for yourselves treasures upon earth, for where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. So our primary task is not to feed the poor or help the sick, but to purify ourselves, to achieve metanoia, a change of mind and heart. That's why giving away what we own is presented as something that primarily benefits the giver, not the receiver. The reason Jesus gives to invite the poor to the feast is not that so they would enjoy it, but because they cannot recompense thee. Jesus does not leave us with a set of clear moral rules. Do this, don't do that. Much more importantly and more challengingly, he tells us that if we're serious about living well, we all have to work hard to change ourselves to the very core. This message has power whether you believe Jesus was the Son of God or not. I've often heard people say, I don't believe Jesus was the Son of God, but I do think he was a great moral teacher. And I always want to reply, well, really? But then I'd never actually looked at Jesus' teachings and analysed them as a serious piece of moral philosophy. And when I did, I was actually surprised at how powerful and relevant so many of his teachings still are today. Ask people what makes the moral teaching of Jesus distinctive, and most will say it's his emphasis on forgiveness. We should turn the other cheek and ask for forgiveness, as we also forgive everyone that is indebted to us. On one occasion, his disciple Peter asked him how many times forgiveness should be offered. 7, perhaps? No, says Jesus, until 70 times 7. And if your brother trespass against thee 7 times in a day, and 7 times in a day turn again to thee, saying, I repent, thou shalt forgive him. But it's very clear here and elsewhere that forgiveness is not something we dish out unconditionally. Notice that we are told to keep forgiving our brother if each time he does wrong, he turns to us and repents. Jesus then goes into detail saying how we should resolve the conflict, but the process of forgiveness has its limits. If the brother still won't repent when you've tried everything, let him be unto thee as an heathen man and a tax collector. Nor is the famous injunction to turn the other cheek simply a matter of forgiveness. Roman soldiers would often strike Jews to humiliate them. To turn the other cheek is actually an act of peaceful defiance. It's saying, you cannot humiliate me. The main point of forgiveness is not to dispense absolution, but to heal relationships. You forgive your brother to re-establish your fraternity. If that doesn't work, the offer of forgiveness is withdrawn. But we also forgive because if we don't, we become too fixated on the failings of others and neglect the more important work of correcting ourselves. Cast out first the beam out of thine own eye, and then shalt thou see clearly to pull out the mote that is in thy brother's eye. So forgiveness is not an unconditional act, and certainly not a submissive one. It's about trying to heal relationships and reminding ourselves that we too do wrong. That's a message that should still resonate for everyone today, Christian or not. When I spoke to a number of theologians and philosophers about the moral teaching of Jesus, I was actually surprised to find that they almost all said that he doesn't give us a clear and complete moral code. That doesn't mean he's not an interesting and important moral thinker. What he offers us are a series of profound challenges, ones that are actually very unsettling. Christians today are among the strongest supporters of so-called traditional family values. And in the Gospels, Jesus is even stricter about the immorality of divorce than many of his contemporaries. Whosoever shall put away his wife, saving for the cause of fornication, causeth her to commit adultery, and whosoever shall marry her, that is divorced, committeth adultery. However, he refuses to condemn a woman caught in adultery, challenging her accusers, "He that is without sin among you, let him first cast a stone at her." Most remarkably, Jesus is strongly critical of families. When his disciples suggest it is not good to marry, Jesus essentially agrees, but acknowledges this is difficult. All men cannot receive this saying. This often overlooked passage shows that Jesus, as well as Paul, believed it was better not to marry. But if they cannot contain, let them marry, for it is better to marry than to burn. But there's worse. When he calls a man to follow him, who asks if he can bury his dead father first, he refuses, saying, "Let the dead bury their dead." He even tells his followers, "If any man come to me and hate not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yes, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple." Christians convinced their founder was a big supporter of family values should wake up to these teachings. But they are of interest to others too. Today, the family is the closest thing many have to the sacred. Jesus repeatedly suggests that it is wrong to place this much importance on it. Worship of family above all else is a kind of idolatry. To put family above the path of righteousness and the development of goodness is a profound mistake, and not just for Christians. Many people think they know Jesus and what he stood for. He's the prophet of forgiveness. He's the friend of the poor, the enemy of the powerful, the upholder of family values. But if you look beyond this meek and mild image, what you actually find is a very uncompromising and challenging figure who actually thought that most people were not up to the task of following his word. For many are called and few are chosen. Jesus has been a hero both to right-wing conservatives, such as many contemporary evangelicals, and progressive liberals, like Methodists and Quakers. So how could one man's teaching be interpreted so differently? Well, Jesus' siding with the poor and the weak makes him a natural bedfellow for progressives. However, there's one massive problem with casting Jesus as a kind of proto-socialist, and that's that he wasn't interested in politics at all. Time and again, he refused calls to lead a political campaign for change. "My kingdom is not of this world," he told Pilate. "Render therefore unto Caesar the things that are Caesar's," he told those trying to trap him into resisting secular authority. He told his followers, "The kingdom of heaven is within you. It's not an ideal state to be established on earth." John the Baptist's slogan, "He that hath two coats, let him impart to him that hath none," may sound like a version of Marx's "from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs," but Jesus never advocated the state forcing such a redistribution. It is this focus on individual responsibility that enables conservatives to claim Jesus as their own. Now, in Jesus' time, maybe the possibility of political change was too remote to make it a priority, but that's not the case today. If you share Jesus' concern for the poor and for justice, it would be perverse to ignore the political options. But there's still something we can learn from his reluctance to advocate political action. A change in government can bring major important changes to the conditions of life. But the most important and profound changes we can make are to ourselves. They're changes of heart and of mind.